Welcome to the Trinity Forum. Welcome to those of you who are here in person. Those of you who will be joining us a little bit later online, we're so glad that you're here. And this is a huge get to be able to have an interview with Gulnar Fereesta just a few weeks before Pride in the CLE, because you are the boss of this thing, right? You are pretty much running the thing.
It's a team effort.
It's
definitely a team effort. I wouldn't say any one of us is the boss of the thing, but it is a program of the center.
And there are a lot of great downtown events. This is one of the preeminent ones in Cleveland, I've found.
I mean, I would like to think so.
But
I am kind of biased.
You are biased, and you should be biased. And it always helps that it's just, I'm going to jinx it, but the weather is always gorgeous. It's the beginning of June. I will add extra, you will get Episcopal prayers for a good sunny day. Weather. Yes. I will do my very best. Okay, so I have jumped right in, but Gulnar is the Senior Program Director of the LGBT Center of Greater Cleveland. She is you use she, they pronouns?
Yes.
Okay. I use he, him pronouns.
Thank you.
And you are responsible largely for Pride in the CLE, but tell us a little bit more about, before we get to the Pride March, let's talk a little bit just quickly about what is the scope of your work with the LGBT Center?
Sure. So I have the great honor and privilege of working with an amazing group of talented queer professionals at the LGBT Center, and I get to oversee all our programs, which include programming for seniors, 50 plus, called Rainbow Pioneers, our program for trans and gender diverse folks called Trans Plus, and then our youth program, which is called QU, which includes a drop-in program, a leadership development institute, and queer prom, our queer youth ambassadors. There's a lot of components to our youth programming. We also have a fantastic partnership with the Cleveland Metropolitan School District, where we are the first and only LGBT community center to have a public school located within its premises. So we're very proud of that. It is called the School of One. We serve students from grade 9 to 12. Students that graduate are graduates of CMSD, so they get a high school diploma, and they are eligible for the Say Yes scholarships, which is fantastic.
That is fantastic.
Yeah, and then we have, those are sort of our core direct programs. We have a great education and advocacy program through which we do a lot of training out in the community. Of course, Pride in the CLE. We also have a partnership with Metro Health, where we have a Pride clinic on site. So 5 days a week, folks can get affirming and inclusive healthcare on site at the clinic, full range of primary care services, and lots and lots of other things, including research. So it's a continuously evolving range of programs. I think what's different and unique about the LGBT Center, after having visited several, is that I've found that most LGBT centers tend to be medical focused, so they're offering a lot of medical services, or they tend to be very population focused in terms of, they're primarily a youth center, or primarily a center that's serving older adults, or primarily only serving trans and gender diverse folks. At the community center, we serve the entire spectrum of the community. And while we are not a direct medical care provider, we act as a convener, bringing providers in to offer care in community. So that's the center.
It sounds like the center is really deeply committed to an integrated whole approach to care and support and really community building.
Absolutely, absolutely. Everything we do at the center is through the lens of the social determinants of health. We know that there are such significant disparities across marginalized populations, and especially those that live at the intersection of queer and BIPOC identity. And so we know that there are ways in which we can support the community by focusing on those social determinants of health. A lot of times when you think about them, it's primarily in a healthcare setting, but people don't live in a healthcare setting. People live in communities, so it's very important to ensure that we're building strong supports and an ecosystem where people can thrive while being their authentic selves.
To me, the social determinants of health is something I've only really been exposed to in the last handful of years. Is that something that has really been at the heart of the LGBT Center since the beginning, or has that been an evolution in terms of how you all approach your mission?
That's a really great question. I would say that in my opinion, it's always been at the heart of the center, but we didn't have the language for it. And so now we have the language for it, and we realize that, oh, okay, it's social determinants of health, but the center has always been focused on serving those that are most marginalized in our community. And so initially when we started, it was because there was a huge need for LGBTQ plus people to get support and resources as the HIV epidemic was coming onto the scene and blowing up, and gay people were pretty much demonized and marginalized because of that. And so the community rallied around to create support. Simple, basic things such as getting access to a doctor. There were doctors that refused to see patients that had HIV, to transportation, helping people get to appointments, support programs. The center was one of the first to have a open and out support program for people living with HIV in the country, and it was called the Living Room. And that was sort of like the initial sort of, I would say like the initial seeds of where the center grew into what it is today. It was this place where people would come to, have support, and it was called the Living Room because it was initially in somebody's living room, but also, the premise around it was it's the place you come to have hope to live. And it provided support not just for people living with HIV, but also those that were caring for them. And from there, it continued to grow and grow and grow exponentially in the last, I would say, 8 to 10 years. So it's
that center, and I imagine a lot of others, really the identity having been forged in the era of HIV, a real sense of the healthcare needs, as well as the psychological, spiritual, just the human needs.
Yes.
Very much formed
Basic
in
needs.
that lens.
Yes. I mean, the center is one of some people say it's the third oldest, some people say it's the 5 oldest. I just say it's in the top 5 oldest continuously operating LGBT centers. We were founded in 1975 as the High Gear Foundation, and High Gear was a publication that was focused on providing information and resources to queer folk. And we should be very proud that as a city we have supported an LGBT center since 1975, over 45 years, and we're actually going to be going into our 50th year in 2025. So that's an amazing legacy for the city. Thank you.
I hope lots of other groups will be able to support and celebrate with you when that happens.
Yes, I hope so too.
Just let us know.
Absolutely. Oh, you will know.
Okay, good. All right. I'm hinting something here. It's just like
absolutely.
When we talk about the social determinants of health, is that you all are my sample population? Is that a familiar phrase? Would it help to go into that a little bit of what that means?
Sure. I would be happy to. So when we talk about social determinants of health, we're talking about all the quality of life factors that come together to ensure that a person is healthy, that they're thriving, that they are able to have a basic quality of life. So that includes things like transportation, that includes things like food security, housing security, economic opportunity, and education. And so all of those are the primary factors that if you are able to access all of those and have equity in terms of access and opportunity. They come together to be able to support individuals in having optimal well-being and being able to thrive.
When I hear the term social determinants of health, which of course makes a lot of sense in that it's very much a phrase that maybe we didn't have the language for it, but
Right.
we knew that if you can't afford your medications, if you have to decide between medications and food,
Right.
if you can't actually get transportation to a place, if a healthcare provider won't even treat you because you have a certain disease or because you're gay, then these are all, or because you're a person of color, you can go down the list, that there are lots of social determinants that keep us from having equitable access to healthcare. The term, I also wonder if we can think about spiritual determinants of health.
Spirituality is a component, actually. I missed the most important component, which is community. Being in community, having a place where you can be in community with others, to have support. And so that includes whether it's spiritual, whether it's secular, whether it's affinity-based, but having a place where you can belong
Right.
is a central component of those social determinants.
So many churches are, among many of the folks that you care for, do you find that they folks also connect to communities of faith? I realize that's a complicated question because so many communities of faith historically have not been welcoming, have
Yes.
not been affirming. So maybe a better way to answer that question, to ask that question is, for those who are in a community that celebrates them, how does that inform their life and their story? And for those who are struggling and healing from communities of faith that were less than caring and loving, how does that inform the story?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
It's probably many stories that I'm asking. I mean, everybody.
Yeah, I think it's very nuanced, and I think that I would say that it's hard to sort of generalize just because the individual lived experiences are so diverse and so different. What I have found is that, yes, there are people that are connected to communities of faith in our community, and they have very vibrant and full spiritual lives. There are also many in our community that have had a lot of trauma perpetuated in their interactions and their lived experience with communities of faith. And so, you could say that at one end of the spectrum are those that are fully engaged, and on the other end of the spectrum are those that are like, oh, heck no, I am not going over there or get anywhere near that. I think it really depends. And then there's those in the middle, like me. I'm a queer South Asian immigrant person who is also Muslim. And often I get some side eye from people who are like, I didn't know that there were queer Muslims. And I'm like, well, yes, we exist. We're here. And I am a person of faith. For me, everything I do, my work, my engagement in the community, the way I navigate life is from a faith perspective. But I think that I have had the privilege of being able to navigate for myself, and explore for myself what it means to be a queer Muslim, what it means to live in a community, a faith community that tends to be unwelcoming, that tends to be more conservative. But I don't think that that's real Islam, right? But I've had the opportunity to sort of delve into the theology, read the scripture for myself, and realize that the word homosexuality doesn't even exist in the Quran. And so being able to have time to reflect and really struggle with and negotiate with those tough questions. And I think what it comes down to is, there's the faith as it is in the scripture, in the principles and the values that you're taught, and then there's the lived faith. And often I find that the lived faith does not necessarily align with the values or the teachings of the faith. Often it gets politicized. Often faith gets used as a mechanism of oppression and control. But the privilege comes in is that I've had the time. Luxury is time is a luxury that often when you are navigating basic needs, when you're just struggling to survive, faith is sort of like down here when it comes to like, okay, let me sit and reflect on, the meaning of life, right? Like that's not on the top priority for individuals. So I think, it's a really hard question to answer because of those differences and nuances of lived experiences. But I would say that more and more what I am really happy about and what gives me hope is that we are seeing communities of faith and places of worship that are becoming more open and that are having these conversations like we are having today. And that there are churches that are led by queer people now, right? We have a lot of queer-friendly churches now, which is amazing. I want to see a queer-friendly mosque. There is one in Chicago. It's called Masjid al-Rabia. But I'd love to see more of those spaces that center those that are marginalized.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of nuance in any space, in any tradition. Within the Christian tradition, there are many ways of interpreting it. And those of us who value inclusivity and diversity and being affirming is a part of how we understand human dignity. We find that we're not the churches that often make the papers. And so we have to be, we're trying. But then again, it's also, there is so much that kind of trauma gets visited across the spectrum of our culture and society. And so people walk in the door and see, and of course it's a projection of real experience, something that is not who we are. And I think part of navigating as people of faith to say this kind of exclusive, bigoted, hate-filled story, which has unfortunately been a part of much of the story of Christianity in recent decades and centuries, is one that we're trying to do really intentional work around, work to heal from, and take responsibility for. And I think that's experienced differently in every different denomination. It's experienced differently in every different church itself. The Episcopal Church, we are not quite where we were 40, 50 years ago. There's been a lot of work that's been done. And as we see our siblings in the Methodist and Presbyterian Church going through that a little bit more acutely, the Methodist Church in particular had a significant split, which is, heartbreaking. I know a great many Methodist ministers who would approach it in the very much the same way I am, and a church that they love is not, is really hurting because of that. So we're not sort of we're not a complete process here, even at Trinity or in the Episcopal Church. Where are you seeing that, if I could ask a little bit more about the Muslim community, are you seeing some of that movement happening, whether it's in local community? Where do you get that kind of nuance? Where do you get that kind of diversity of thought?
I think that, again, this is only Gulnar's opinion.
Right. That sounds
Gulnar's
like a really good,
lived,
that
it's
sounds
a lived
like a really
experience.
Good podcast title, by the way. Only Gulnar's opinion. I would listen to that every week.
I think you'd probably be the only one.
Will you have me on it?
Sure.
Okay, good.
So I think that in my lived experience, I am from a minority Muslim community. So, in the Muslim community, the main two groups are you'll have the Sunni and the Shia, right? And that's like a split that goes back to like several centuries ago, and about 1200 years or so. And so what is most predominant across the world or what we call mainstream Islam, is Sunni Islam. And then within the Shiite practice, there are several other sub-denominations, and I belong to one of them. We are a small minority community. We are called the Ismailis, and we've been, again, persecuted for most of our history. But I do feel that it is in those margins, in those margin communities, that we see a great diversity of thought, a great diversity of intellectual tradition in exploring faith and living faith, and exploring that tension between what does a lived faith look like that is true to the values of Islam, which are very much grounded in social justice, which are very much grounded in equity, which, you know, when generally people think about Islam, that is not the things that they associate with it, right? And so there's also this element of Islamophobia, which is primarily driven by these narratives that are perpetuated by a very small minority of the larger Muslim community, right? There's 1.6 billion Muslims in the world, maybe more. And, you know, predominantly we're pretty chill. We just want to live our lives and thrive just like anybody else. But unfortunately, the dominant narrative is one that perceives Islam to be anti-Western, anti-science, anti-progress, which is really not the case, because if you go back to the founding of the faith, Islam was very radical, right? It was the first faith to grant women the right to own businesses, the first faith to grant women the right to divorce, the right to have be included in wills, like that women must have their share of whatever generational wealth there is when people pass away. The first right to like marry or not marry, right? To be independent, whole beings, and that often gets lost. And so I think that we really must look to the margins of the community where a lot of these intellectual traditions there's a history of that, there's a lot of exploration around it, and bring those conversations to the forefront rather than focusing on you know, the small minority that is very vocal and very loud, and unfortunately shaping the narrative and perception of an entire community.
Yeah. I can certainly connect to that through the history of the Christian tradition, when it was those, from the fringes, the margins, that renewal would happen. I mean, St. Francis was kind of part of a kind of crazy sect, so to speak. That's overstating it a little bit, but well, some people thought he was crazy, and he really moved towards radical poverty, radical demilitarization, and of course he loved animals too. But the point is, this was not something that the establishment of the church was terribly excited about. There seems to always be a relationship between power and piety, and it comes from the margins.
Yes.
The new thing, I suppose, and the capacity to actually live life rather than have that narrative forced upon us by, as you say, a pretty relatively small group of people.
Yeah, but they're loud and they're pretty vocal, and you know, there's also geopolitics, right? Like, faith is so politicized that we can't talk about faith without acknowledging the geopolitics of faith and the way it shapes people's lives and their lived experience.
Well, coming back to Cleveland.
We've traveled the world.
We traveled the world. We did faith, we did geopolitics, we did Sunni, we did Shia. As we come back to Cleveland, in your programming work, we've also talked about housing. We've talked about some of the challenges that LGBT folks are faced with. What are some of the things now that you would name as some of the biggest challenges facing LGBT youth and adults right here in Cleveland? The very first thing that comes to my mind is the slate of anti-LGBTQ
plus legislation that is working its way through committees, that is having its hearings, because those, if they pass, and they most probably will, because of the current structure of the legislature in terms of party affiliation, this will have life-changing impact on people right here in Cleveland. Whether it is a trans or gender diverse young person whose parents, by the way, have consented to them to receive, for them to receive gender affirming care, and yet they could be criminalized. The providers could be criminalized. There's actually a clause in one of the anti-trans health care bans where there's a requirement that the state create a statewide directory of providers and who they're serving and what types of gender affirming care they're providing. And what does that mean for people's privacy? What does that mean for people's protection? At the same time, it's sort of like ironic that there's also a protect the parents' rights bill, sort of that's what it's termed, around education in the schools, right? So our version of Florida is anti-gay, don't say gay, don't say race, don't say anything that might make anybody uncomfortable simply because it's the truth type of bill. And so that's being touted as, protecting parental rights. But then at the same time, you've got this bill that is really sort of antithetical to protecting parents' rights around making decisions around providing care for their children. And then, there's the trans athlete ban. There's a slew of these types of legislations that are really going to impact the community. Something that keeps me up at night, honestly, is with the school at the center. And if a bill like this one passes, where you can't say gay, you can't talk about gender, you can't talk about sexuality, you can't talk about social justice, how do you have a school at the LGBT Center without violating that law? Because you can't say the School of One at the LGBT Center, right? It's right there in the name. So what happens there when you've, sorry, I think I just hit the thing. But what do you do when, we have responded to a need, a very important need in the community where there are so many young queer people not making it through school, not making it through middle school or high school because of the harassment, because of the bullying, because different districts are passing resolutions that you can only use the restroom that is associated with your gender assigned at birth, where you're being banned from participating in school athletics, which is a part of every young person's growing up experience that they should have the opportunity to experience. And so, that's one end, but then it also makes me think about, well, how does this impact the systems, right? Like it is making it lawful to discriminate against an entire segment of the population, which is really, really awful, especially when you think about the most recent youth risk behavior survey. So every year the youth risk behavior survey is implemented. They do it in alternating years, 1 year high school, 1 year middle school. So last year was high school, and in part of the results, we found that 25.5% of high school aged children in Cuyahoga County identify as LGBTQ, right? So if you extrapolate, and that's not middle school, that's not elementary, that's not college, but if you extrapolate that out, that's, if not now, definitely in 4 years when the last of them graduate high school, that's 20% of our county's population. Are we gonna discriminate again and make it entirely impossible for 20% of our county's population to live and thrive in Cleveland? What does that mean? People love to talk about economics, but what does that mean for brain drain? What does that mean for retaining talent here in the county and in the city. And so, so definitely, I could talk about this legislative stuff a lot, but it ties really hand in hand with the other big challenge, which is housing.
Right.
There is no LGBTQ plus housing in Cuyahoga County or Cleveland, which is kind of odd for a large metropolitan city like ours, that we have no LGBTQ specific emergency or supportive housing for young queer kids that get kicked out because they got outed, or their parents find out that they're queer or gay or whatever, or they turn 18 and the next thing you know, I mean, we've had this. We've had kids come in on their 18th birthday, they got kicked out. Where do you send them that they're going to be safe, right? There's no LGBTQ plus shelters. And if people go through the voucher system, it takes about, sometimes 18 months to get a voucher. What are they supposed to do in the meantime?
Right.
They're living on the streets. When you're talking about living on the streets or engaging in informal street economies, or survival sex, engaging in, exchanging sex for basic needs, to have a place to sleep, to be able to have food. And then that sort of like amalgamates into this broader issue of like when people get mad about the homeless living in tents, or, people utilizing resources to meet those basic needs. Well, that's what happens. And so I think it really comes down to housing. I think we have an opportunity, at least I think we have an opportunity, and this is sort of like my latest addition to my soapbox, which is housing is prevention. So Cuyahoga County has a 5-year ending the HIV epidemic plan. There's a big drive federally for ending the HIV epidemic. And what happens is, people don't realize is, once you get HIV, there's a whole slew of resources that open up for you to help you with housing, with healthcare, with transportation, all of those basic needs. I'm not saying that those resources are enough. I think that they are still far too limited, and we need more resources. But what if we had created a system where people can have those basic needs met before they end up getting HIV, right? So housing people allows them to have access. You can't get a job if you don't have a place to sleep, right? You can't receive mail anywhere. Where are you gonna, it makes it hard for you to get a state ID or a driver's license if you don't have a mailing address. It's hard to engage in healthcare and stay connected and plugged into healthcare if you don't have housing. So housing is like so core in providing people a step up into being able to engage and participate more fully in society, and also then eventually be civically engaged, right? A vibrant city needs a civically engaged population. And so
can't afford to lose 20% of its engaged population.
Exactly. So like my thing right now is, well, how about we prevent people from getting HIV in the first place by making sure they have somewhere to sleep and somewhere to be safe, so that they are not engaging in those higher risk behaviors and survival strategies that end up with them being at higher risk for, getting HIV or transmitting HIV.
Before we turn to the congregation for questions, let's talk a little bit about Pride in the CLE.
Yeah.
What are you excited about this year?
I'm so excited. So many, everything, all of it.
Okay, moving on.
All the Pride.
Tell us.
So this year we're really excited. What we're doing is a community kickoff. So we have a partnership with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And so we are gonna do a community kickoff at the Rock Hall on Thursday, June 1st. So that'll be from 5:30 to 9 p.m. Lots of great local bands. The School of Rock, which is a youth music group, is gonna be performing from a music school. The kids from the Near West Theater program are gonna be doing a number. It'll be very much focused on the arts and lifting up performers, all types of art. We'll have a drag story time, which is going to have one of our community elders who is an icon. Her name is Isis. She is, yes, so Isis, see, well-known community icon. She will
Does
be
she preach?
She might. I don't know. You might be able to convince her.
She's an ex-basketball player. She's a tall, tall woman.
All right then.
And she's amazing and beautiful, and she's going to be doing a drag story time. And then, Friday is sort of like the nightlife kickoff. So we will be celebrating and kicking off Pride weekend at all the different bars and establishments, queer-friendly spaces. And then Saturday is the event itself. We will be, this year we're doing the march a little bit early, so we will be meeting at Public Square to gather and stage, and then we will be stepping off from Public Square around 11, and then we will march to Malls B and C. Sometimes people call it a parade, and we're often very, very intentional about saying, nope, it's not a parade, it is a march. It is a march because we are still in the fight for our rights, we are still in the fight for equality, and Pride is a movement, it is not a moment. So the movement continues. It is the way that we honor the roots of Pride, the roots of the LGBT equality fight movement. And then, we'll have the festival. We have a main stage that's going to have lots of great acts. Again, we want to lift up local queer artists and performers. Near West will be performing again. Lots of different drag performers. There'll be several showcases. And then we also have our Speak Out stage. So every year at Pride, for the last, I think, 4 or 5 years, we've had a Speak Out stage, which is the activist stage, which is where anybody who has a message that they want to deliver, they can get up on stage and have 5 minutes to get their message out, to really engage people and get them activated and mobilized around organizing. We will be also having a couple of drag story hours on the Speak Out stage. There's a really great health and wellness village right around the Speak Out, near the Speak Out stage, where all our community health partners are going to be there. The Cuyahoga County Board of Health is going to be there doing vaccinations for both COVID and monkeypox. There will be HIV, STI testing and treatment and PrEP. Metro Health is going to be there, University Hospital, like everyone. And then there's also a very intentional family and youth space that's been created with a lot of games and fun activities and arts and crafts. And then we also have, we try to be as inclusive as we can, and each year we try to do better because we know we're not perfect and we don't get it right. And people let us know when we don't get it right. So this year we're going to improve upon our quiet space that we had last year, but it'll be even more robust. We have a space inside the Hilton on Mall B where we are procuring a space that's going to be quiet and help folks that might have sensory challenges, might need a quiet space to sort of process and decompress. Thank you, that's the word. And so that'll be there. Oh, I forgot, at the Rock Hall, we are also having a protest garment fashion show with Mocha. So we're partnering with artists at Mocha who, one of the artists, their entire focus is on community activism and protest. So everywhere they go, they were here last year and they did protest banners, and then in the city that they visit, they create a library for protest banners where people can borrow and return these different banners for different types of protest. So this year we're taking a step further and we said, well, activism often informs culture, activism often informs, when it informs culture, it also informs the way that we dress. And so it's, the theme is basically from the streets to the stage, and we'll have participants, about 10 to 12 folks that have worked with the artists to create their garments and their costumes, showing off their best protest wear.
Nice. Excellent.
Yeah.
And when during the parade or during?
No,
the,
this will
I'm
be-
sorry, the march. I slipped. It's
No, not the march,
During the-
but at the Rock Hall
At the
on
Rock Hall on
Thursday
Thursday night,
the
the
1st.
1st,
Community
okay.
kickoff, Pride
All right.
Rocks, yeah.
Good. Do you have questions for Gulnar? Ron, and please take the microphone and let us know who you are.
Ron Ross. With all the issues that are still facing the gay population, is the center involved with HRC? Are they involved with a PAC or lobbying efforts?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. We have to be careful in terms of how we get involved in lobbying and those kinds of things because we are a nonprofit. But we do partner with our sister organizations and other LGBTQ organizations that are engaged in the work. So Equality Ohio is one of them, HRC, Honesty for Ohio Education. And so we've had community forums. We did a few last year on the different legislation. We'll partner with them around testimony writing workshops and things like that. And we ourselves have gone down to Columbus to protest and give testimony. Worked with some of our youth who delivered testimony in front of the school board and in front of the legislature. So yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Toby.
Yeah.
Toby.
I'm fortunate, for the center to be there. I've been involved with the center. I first got involved with the center back in the early 90s when I went to a Friday night rap group. And then I've been also what's involved with the integrity group with the Episcopal Church. They used to meet up at St. Peter's in Lakewood. And it was like in the late 80s, early 90s that I really started coming out of the closet, even though people have known I was gay since I was a kid, basically. And from there, I started with the Friday night rap group. And then there was like another group I got involved with. And then I was in Men in Touch, and then like in the 96, I was with probably one of the longest running groups that were at the center. It was called the Men's Discussion Group. And it started meeting in late 96, and then it ended in New Year's Eve 2000, because right after, we had like ups and downs with the group, the attendants, the facilitators. We've had many people come and go. And for, I think, like last year or so, I was the facilitator. And I'm just proud to be part of that. They used to be part of that group, but as I said, as people aged or passed away or moved on, we ended up shutting down the group via a Zoom chat, because we met through Zoom since COVID at the end of 2000, or 2020, I mean. And I still keep in touch with some of the group members, and then one younger group member still volunteers with the center. As I said, I hadn't been to the center since COVID, but I know that a lot of stuff has changed and a lot of stuff remains. But I do credit the center as well as Trinity and PFLAG and others for making me comfortable as a gay man. Toby Radloff, he, him, his.
Thank you.
Thank you, Toby.
Thank you.
Dan.
Hi,
Hi.
Dan McGuire. Regarding the issue with youth, has there been any discussion with Covenant House about opening a chapter in Cleveland, or is any activity going on with that?
So I'm not too familiar with Covenant House. I know they do work around housing and supporting youth, but we have had we've been mobilizing and convening folks around coming up with a local Cleveland-based solution. I know that there have been several groups that have talked to different places, like I believe Lighthouse is another organization, Kaleidoscope down in Columbus, of like, how did you make this happen and work in your city? And so how can we replicate that success here? But I'm not familiar with any specifically to Covenant House.
Yeah, Covenant House, it may be more New York, New Jersey based, and they do provide housing for LGBTQ youth. And I know they have fundraisers that some of my colleagues have taken part in where people would sleep outside overnight and raise money for doing that, just to emphasize the need for youth housing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think what we want to look at is a full spectrum of like a continuum of housing support, because yes, there is a huge challenge and a huge need at the youth level, but I would say it's across the entire spectrum of the LGBT community. And what often happens is, especially that middle group, after you turn 18 or you turn 24, depending on whether you're engaged with the foster care system or not, all of a sudden you age out and there's no resources. And then, there's no resources until you maybe hit 65, right? And so there's a huge segment of the community that is in dire need in that range. And even some of our elders, we've had elders who, a partner passes away, the lease was in the partner's name, and now they're being evicted, and now they're at risk of homelessness, and working with them through those emergency situations, trying to figure out how do we get this voucher passed over. I mean, folks that even get vouchers, it's about 18 months, like I was saying, in some cases sooner, 8 months, 9 months. But then you got to have landlords that are safe, right? You got to have landlords that are willing to take those vouchers and take those subsidies and provide safe housing. But I mean, I've talked to people that have had, landlords that have been harassing them, some even forcing folks into some sort of unwanted sexual exchange just in order for them to agree to take the voucher. Or it's that power dynamic, right? People exerting their power over people that are so deeply vulnerable.
We'll draw to a close.
Okay.
Gulnar, thank you very much for being with us this morning.
Thank
Once
you.
again, Gulnar
Grateful.
Fereesta is the Senior Program Director of the LGBT Center. She is very busy with trying the CLE, and so was very gracious in coming to talk to us. But clearly, what is on your plate is not just a major event, but the fullness of advocacy and community support. And we thank you for your work, and we're grateful for the work of the LGBT Center. We're really grateful for your time this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm grateful for your time, and thank you for having me. Really happy to be here.